Welcome, everybody. Thanks a lot for all of you that are here today. Thank for everybody that are watching us, following us online. Uh, our event today is Philanthropy for Climate, catalyzing climate action through the global philanthropic resources mobilization. So we are here with a very diverse panel, people working on philanthropy from very different perspectives. And we want to show, actually, as part of this conversation on finance around COP, that there are many ways through which philanthropy can support climate action. There are many avenues that philanthropy has been using to get into the climate conversation. And the Philanthropy for Climate is one of those movements that we have been helping and striving to bring more philanthropic resources to the space. Before going to a very short presentation about the Philanthropy for Climate movement, I just wanted to name and welcome our speakers today. So just next to me, we have Juan Ferreira, Program Director of Latimpacto, coming straight from Colombia. Welcome, Juan David. Then we have Naila Farouky, the CEO from Arab Foundation Forum. Welcome, Naila. We have Hanna Hanses from Philea, policy manager from Philea. We have Heather Buchanan, Director of Policy and Strategy on the Fair Business Banking from UK. Welcome. And then Allie Hollowell from Costa Rica, COO of IVPC. Welcome. So without further ado, I just wanted to set a little bit the scene of why are we discussing this here and what are some of the biggest challenges we are seeing as the climate philanthropy landscape. So, of course, this is actually a very new discussion, okay? We have like several philanthropic organizations already engaging for a long time on climate action, but they are still representing a very small portion of the philanthropic sector overall. The challenge number one is that there are not enough philanthropic resources going to climate. We have this research showing from 2018 that there were about 260,000 foundations everywhere in the world. The vast majority are in the US and in Europe, but we know that this data doesn't really bring all the what's happening in this sector that is flourishing so much everywhere. And I'm sure Juan David and Allie in particular are going to touch upon that later on. Just to give you a sense, just in China, which doesn't show that quite clearly, the number of philanthropic organizations mapped changed from 3,000 to 8,000 just in 7 years. Imagine now. So there is a lot of things going on in the philanthropic space that are not necessarily being captured by the climate philanthropy specific narrative. Still, we do have an important resource from Climate Works Foundation, which already showed for 3 years that only 2% of the philanthropic giving goes to climate change mitigation. This is based on a handful, not a handful, but around 100 foundations that are specifically working on climate. And we know that this is not enough. This report was just launched about a week ago, and it's despite the growing momentum on climate action, even inside the philanthropic space, the percentage is the same. So we need to solve that. The second big challenge on climate philanthropy is where are the climate philanthropy resources going and what social benefits they are generating. So the whole discussion on North and South, on climate finance, on 100 billion. So where is the climate philanthropy landscape actually as part of this bigger discussion? And what is the quality? I mean, not only if we, in one hand, we need to talk about the quantity of resources, but what is the quality? What kind of resources are they going there? So several members of WINGS and several philanthropy support organizations have been touching upon that. So AVPN in Asia, and which is part of the family that Ellie will touch us upon. We have the Edge Funders Alliance. So there is a whole big debate on that, and specifically, where is the role or what is the space for global South philanthropies on that? And the third thing is the urgency, the nature, and the scale of the problem can feel overwhelming for non-climate funders to engage. So this is a fact actually for everybody who is not a climate expert, even for who is a climate expert either as well. But the thing is, if we have new funders willing to come in, how can we make it easier for them to step in? So that's why Philanthropy for Climate exists. It's a global movement of foundations and philanthropy support organizations committed to taking urgent action on climate change. The movement already counts with 587 organizations spread in 21 countries. They have already signed a commitment, a pledge. It's not a like Race to Zero pledge. It's just a pledge showing that they're going to work on climate and they are going to strive to do based on whatever capacity they have. We have like 5 national commitment signatories, commitment hosts. Hanna will touch upon that because this movement is much more developed in Europe than elsewhere. But we also have international commitment signatories in other parts of the world, especially in the global south. So this diversity of foundations, they have already started their journey to look into education, how they can educate their staff, how they can integrate climate, even if they are a health funder, an education funder, or working on poverty issues, for instance. And they have to look into all these 7 pillars that I'll save you from the details, but that are part of the philanthropic activity. I think the main issue here is that we need to look into philanthropy, not only from the resources it gives, but the whole catalytic role that it can play as a consumer, as one that has operations and has many other ways of influencing beyond money. And to conclude and actually start our discussion, this would never be possible without a philanthropic network of organizations. This map, which was produced by Philea, actually shows some, not all, the players that have been actively pursuing this effort on how can we bring more foundations, more philanthropic organizations to this space? How can we qualify the work of philanthropic organizations to get more impact out of that? So there is a whole constellation of which Wings is very proud of a part, and all of our members that are here in the panel have different roles, different stories, different ways of dealing with that. So without further ado, I wanted to actually start our conversation passing first to Heather, which is actually coming to this conversation from a different perspective, but actually touching upon a very important and key element, which is the financial sector space, how this conversation is happening and what efforts exist there. Also, that is impacting, for instance, the philanthropic capacity to navigate further. The endowments conversation, for instance, is a very particularly key for that. So we want to hear more from your work, please.
Certainly. Thank you very much. So with my Bankers for Net Zero hat on, I'm Bankers for Net Zero with the UK country chapter for the Net Zero Banking Alliance, which is convened by the UN. And it's fair to say that certainly within the financial services industry right now, there's a lot of focus on how they can transition to net zero and support their customers and do so in a just way. I think with all of these things, we're getting better at collaboration and coordination. But I find that that's probably one of the big areas where certainly the foundations can really play a role in helping catalyze that. Because sometimes they're, just removing that initial barrier to entry or that perceived barrier to entry, even for large financial institutions, and where do we go? If you've got that extra bit of backing to help convene people and move things forward, then you can really almost leverage that collaboration and pull more funding in via the private sector as well. So I think that's it's that touch point that this sector can bring in some actors that don't necessarily work together in the first instance. As a really big opportunity.
Thanks very much, Heather. I wanted to hear, especially from Naila. Naila from the Arab Foundation Forum, so an Egyptian, and it's here starting your own journey with your members on how to discuss climate, understanding that climate is not necessarily yet a priority for philanthropies in the region. Can you tell us more about the Arab Foundation Forum and your work and your vision on the philanthropic, the Arab philanthropy space?
Sure. Thank you so much, Alice. So the Arab Foundations Forum is a membership network of organizations that are working in the philanthropy space or around it, whether they're in the region or from outside of the region looking into the region. So we're very new to the climate conversation because, first of all, I mean, as a network, we are sector agnostic, right? So our members deal with anything from health, education, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, in your presentation in the beginning, you were talking about how overwhelming the conversation around climate can be to non-climate funders. And that was exactly the experience that we had. So when we started getting involved in this conversation, looking around at our network and trying to see who had put the climate agenda on their priorities, and didn't find a single actor in our network that had actually made it one of their strategic priorities. And then I was becoming personally also very quickly educated on the climate conversation, and didn't really want to approach my members from a kind of doom and gloom perspective. Oh my, we're all going to die, because I just felt like, you know, that's probably not the best way to get people engaged in a conversation, is to scare them to death. So instead, I tried to find, like, where are the places where the climate conversation actually converges with all the different priorities that our members do have. And lo and behold, you know, obviously anything that our members are dealing with is somehow related to climate. So if it's education, it's climate. If it's health, I mean, obviously coming out of a pandemic, it's climate. So we know that the impact of climate on every one of the priorities of our members is relevant. So we've started having this engagement based on that kind of, let's ease people into the conversation. This is why I'm here. I think I only have two members from our network that are actually present here. And one of them is not even a regional organization, it's Greenpeace. So, I mean, it's the Greenpeace MENA representatives who are here, but they're not a regional entity. And the others are the Sawiris Foundation, which is an Egyptian organization, who's also coming into the conversation around climate very recently, at our urging, really, frankly. So for us, it's very important, the connectivity that we have with Wings. I mean, my interaction with Wings goes way back, as well as being the chair of the board for a while, and now the treasurer of the board, and then also just a very active participant in the Wings network. And so we've been urging our members to, you know, collaborate on the Philanthropy for Climate Pledge as much as they can, and to learn as much as they can about it. And so very grateful for these conversations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Naila. And you mentioned the power of networks, and actually Wings, I realized that I didn't even present myself. I'm sorry for that, but I'm Alice Amorim. I'm the Philanthropy for Climate Lead at Wings. And Wings is also new to this climate conversation, actually. We have been engaging for about 1.5 years. And it's also a lot of that, it's result of its members' demand and the perception that climate is no longer just an overwhelming issue, but something that either threatens or provides opportunities for philanthropies overall to strengthen their own strategies, regardless of their themes. And talking about that, so on the power of networks, I want to bring Allie from IVPC. Please, Allie, tell us more about that.
Thanks, Alice, and it's great to be here today. I think, so IVPC is a family of networks, as was mentioned before, and I'm lucky enough to have one of my colleagues here, Juan, who represents our Latin American network. But we have 4 networks, regional networks for social investors that are working across the continuum of capital, from philanthropy to impact investing, corporate impact investors, or corporate social investors, and financial institutions. So we have a network in Asia, a network in Latin America, as I said, a network in Africa, and a network in Europe. But I'll focus today just on the Asia and Africa perspectives, because we have some great from the other regions that can certainly speak more more intelligently than I can on what's happening there. I spent 5 years working for AVPN, so and I'm on the board of our African network. So those two are probably the ones I'm most qualified to speak on. But I think it's a very similar story to what Naila's just shared, and that it is particularly in the global South, climate action has been seen as government and big business responsibility, and it has felt daunting to get involved in as a philanthropist, not only from the sort of intangibility of it and how do you measure your impact, how do you measure what you're putting money against, is it really having the impact that you want to see, but also because it's this is something that is not I mean, we're here in a climate conference. It's not top priority, though, in the global South, where there are other pressing challenges: education, health, putting food on the table, livelihoods. These issues are, much more pressing on a day-to-day basis. And so this has not been something that's been the top of mind for our members in Asia and our community in Africa. But we're increasingly see it become more pressing and more of an interest to members. But what's lacking right now is helping to make it more tangible. So in Asia in particular, we launched a climate action platform in 2019 because there was a family office in Hong Kong that wanted to help find tangible opportunities, help to identify tangible opportunities for investment for for philanthropists and impact investors in Asia, to help kind of make that connection, to help mobilize the capital where it was needed, and also start to communicate this as being a priority and something that you could move the dial on. And so that started the journey for us in Asia. And now we're moving on. We've done recently a study of our members, and anecdotally, there is definitely more momentum. And when you give the 2% of global philanthropy figure, it is definitely not 2% in the global South. So I think but it's increasing, and I think our role as IVPC, as the IVPC family, is to really be sucking up the knowledge in these types of global convenings and helping to think through how do we connect at that local level to really be getting where it needs to go. We've heard this is the COP, the action COP, the COP for action, COP for implementation, but they need bankable deals. The money is there, but they need bankable deals. Well, our communities are the ones that are helping to fund and build the pipeline for these riskier enterprises, technologies, providing concessionary capital and blended finance deals. So this group is, somebody said the other day, that the tugboat that's pulling in the big barge of the much larger capital that's out there that's needed for this, but we can kind of set the stage. So.
Great. I fully got your point. And I think that's also why, I mean, the whole thing of not being a priority, it's, I think it's a mantra that a lot of people are always using. And I buy that. It's climate is not an environmental issue, it's a development issue. And when it comes to becomes a development issue, it's no longer a non-priority, because development is something that everybody wants, right? And talking of which, actually, although maybe we are talking more from climate as a threat, climate, it's also an opportunity, right? For many regions in the world, also to attract new kinds of business, new kind of business models as well, to conserve forests and so on. And Latimpacto has doing a lot of work on that. Please, Juan David, tell us more about this.
Sure, I'll be more than happy to do so. And just a warning that I'm going to say thanks to Wings for a lot of things, because it was Wings who actually has been an active supporter of our climate action program. But yeah, I want to start saying that as well. Latimpacto, just as Naila mentioned, is also like an agnostic network. As Ali mentioned, it's part of a family of networks. We're on the younger side of the networks. We were created just in 2019, so it's been quite an interesting ride, especially through a pandemic, to create a network in Latin America. But even though we were agnostic, we just decided to identify the main areas of opportunity and the main interest of our members, and create specific roundtables or specific impact communities around these topics. And that's why we arrived to climate action, of course, to migration, and to early childhood development. In the climate action space, it was quite obvious, like Latin America is one of the most biodiverse regions in the world. It has a bunch of natural landscapes. It has a bunch of opportunities, rivers. We are a force of, we are literally a force of nature. But on the other hand, we're as well amongst the most affected regions in the world through by climate change. Of course, we didn't know about talking about how climate change was affecting us. We just mentioned droughts. We just mentioned the increase in hurricanes. We just mentioned floods. So this was our day today. It's been our day today because it hasn't changed in for the last 50 or 60 years as well. So based on this, we just decided to approach the climate change space pretty much open to what our members said, our members thought. But what we discovered is that it's still they still really don't want to talk about it or don't know how to talk about it. And that's why the first step we are doing actually in Latin America, it's teach organizations about what climate means, what is climate adaptation, what is climate mitigation, how can you find your space around climate. And for this as well, this was as well super important with the support of Wings to create our enabling environment for the Amazon, and to allow how our climate philanthropists can better understand how they can work in the Amazon. And on the other hand, one of the a Wings member, Active Philanthropy, which I know it's also a member of Philea and of EVPA. They have this amazing course where they also teach how the intersectionality of climate, and that is super important because it allows organizations who are focused on education, on health. As Ali mentioned, most of our members are focused on education or health, or even nutrition or stuff like that. How does climate intersect with these spaces? So you can start talking to them about climate from a safe space for them, and then just go on. And for us, that was super important, and that is opportunity we want to strengthen. One of the other things we have noticed is that, and as Alice might as well support, Brazil has an amazing climate impact ecosystem. So it's super interesting. There's a lot of organizations. I just want to mention like Instituto Arapiaú, Conexus. These are organizations that are leading the way, and they are super innovative. But when you look at the rest of Latin America, the space is very narrow. And one of the things we want to do as well is creating bridges, inter-regional bridges. And we saw the Amazon as an opportunity for to do so. So the Amazon is a region which covers 9 countries in Latin America, and it's the home of 30 million people. It even has one of the largest cities in Brazil, which is over 2 million people, which is Manaus. And we saw, okay, this is like a space where we can create opportunities and foster connections, and literally for organizations to learn between themselves. Because what we noticed is that the Amazon was thought more on a political state dimension and not as a regional, as a landscape. So through this program that as well Wings support, we managed to foster these connections and bring organizations to learn about what's going on in Brazil, and for Brazilian organizations who are working in the Amazon to teach and to share their learnings, their best practices, their learned lessons to organizations working from Peru, from Colombia, from Ecuador, from Bolivia. So this was an amazing experience, and has been an amazing experience, because out of this we created our program on the impact ecosystem in the Amazon. So yeah, it's been really great, and there's a lot of opportunities. And Latin America, one of the things things I'm most proud of Latin America is that we don't focus on the challenges but on the solutions. So I think that's the most important thing about my region and my network as a whole.
No, I fully understand your point, and I think I wanted to highlight the issue of vulnerability that you mentioned, because Latin America, for instance, is not where most emissions are, like in Asia is going, so it doesn't receive a lot of resources from mitigation side. It's not the most vulnerable necessarily, because we have Africa, the islands, and so on. So in the end of the day, it has all the problems, but it has least resources and attention, comparatively speaking. So, and in the end, who bears the costs of that? Latin American resources, like domestic resources in the end, which are not counted. So, but anyways, I hope we're going to have time for the debates later on. And I just wanted to acknowledge that we do have here one of the signatories of the International Philanthropy Commitment on Climate Change, Fundo Casa, who is stepping just behind us, who works in Latin America as well. So thanks, Amalia, for joining us. And so we have almost moving all over the place, but we haven't really heard about Europe yet. And I wanted to openly and explicitly thank actually Philea for actually supporting and pushing Wings a bit to bring more the Philanthropy for Climate movement. I think without you, we wouldn't have done as much or started at that point. So yeah, let's hear a bit more about the European context, please.
Yes, thank you, Alice, and really thanks to you also for all your great work at the international level and for bringing us all together here today as well. So I'm Hanna indeed, and as policy manager, one of my tasks is to bridge our work on the enabling environment for philanthropy with also showcasing the value of philanthropy towards policymaker based on some issue-based entry points such as climate as well. So Philea is a fairly new organization, actually. We were launched only last year. As many of you probably already know, we consist of a convergence process of the European Foundation Center, which brought in more than 200 of the largest foundations across Europe, and the donors and foundations networks in Europe, which brought in more than 25 of the national associations across Europe. Hence, we represent more than 10,000 foundations. And this also enables us to showcase the added value of community foundations of banking origin, of family foundations, just to name a few. So I think you all already know or are very aware of the richness and the diversity of the philanthropy sector as such, and their added value in leveraging their reach, their ideas, their independence, their also convening power, as was mentioned before, to effect positive change in flexible, long-term, and very innovative ways as well. So I want to use the few minutes I have here to touch on two different points. Indeed, our climate work, which Alice is spearheading at the international level, but also touch on some of the enabling environment policies linked to also the endowments of foundations and what could be done more in that regard. So when it comes to the Philanthropy for Climate movement, this is indeed an example of where we have used our convening power as a philanthropy network to amplify the voices of our members. So we saw an opportunity with the UK National Association launching their commitments, their philanthropy commitments for climate change, to put them in the spotlight and inspire our other national association members to themselves also take action, take climate action. And indeed, the Philanthropy for Climate movement is now a vibrant global community thanks to Alice's work. But I would like to focus today on the European chapter, where the movement is being coordinated by my colleague Karen, who is also here with us today. So just thanks to her also for developing this and coordinating this so skillfully in the European context. So Alice already referred to the great work done by Climate Works Foundation when it comes to data and analysis about where the grants go when it comes to climate philanthropy. And they have also developed jointly with our our European Environmental Funders Network and the Our Slate a specific chapter on Europe. But the data is quite similar. So indeed, we see that not enough grants are going to climate change. And this is really, and I must mention, focused on climate change mitigation only. So only less than 2% is going there. And of this 2%, 38% even stays within the EU, and only about 62% reaches across EU borders. So indeed, we see it with our initiative Philanthropy for Climate to mainstream climate as a cross-cutting issue and to raise the awareness towards other foundations working on health, education, social issues, to bring their expertise to the climate work and to consider climate as a top priority also in their work, without, of course, neglecting the important work they do on the other elements as well. In parallel, we see that the EU, so again, speaking from the European perspective, is focusing heavily on the green and digital transitions. And we see it as our role as philanthropy representatives to ensure that the social component is also included in this, so that we can have a just transition that leaves no one behind. So this brings me to my second point related to the enabling environment for philanthropy. So as the representative body of European philanthropy, we engage with policymakers mainly at the EU level, but also sometimes at national and global levels where it affects our members in the European level. And we do so based on the European Philanthropy Manifesto, where we have listed 4 key recommendations toward policymakers to enable cross-border philanthropy, to strengthen the dialogue with policymakers, but also to protect philanthropy from undue restrictions. And then last but not least, to enable more co-granting and co-investing opportunities with the sector. And I just want to zoom in a bit on this last element because the foundation's attitude on mission-related investments and impact investings, we know that there is a lot they're already doing in different ways, in financial and non-financial ways. They are investing their endowments, they are using their program money, they are implementing projects, and they do so seed funding, enabling crowdfunding. They really a very wide range of innovative ways of dealing with this. So some foundations are indeed already doing that, but others might not want to go there for different reasons. So we see that indeed there are different cultural and legal traditions across the European continent, but also the statutes and the will of the founder might stipulate some restrictions based on this. And then, of course, we know foundations act in very autonomous ways, which might guide their use of funds and their program money to specific ways. So this is all impacting them. So we see indeed that when it comes to the endowments, we have also performed the mapping exercise of the rules, the regulations across 40 countries and have published comparative highlights of these as well. And we see that in some countries, the laws actually require a certain preservation of the endowment. And there is no guarantee sometimes that when foundations engage in what we call mission-related investments, or when they invest in social or green enterprises, that they will also have this required return. In some countries also, even given loans is not permitted. Then on the other hand, there's also the program money of foundations, which they use to support social and green businesses by providing grants, loans, or even lending organizational support sometimes as well. But here also national laws kind of hamper this innovative way of working because they are not allowed to generate returns sometimes with their program resources. So again, we see some barriers. So that's where we come in, and we try to offer solutions as well to the sector. We do so at we consider that policymakers can do more. They can try to de-risk at least partly some of the investments of foundations, but they could also develop innovative financial tools, for example, within co-investment facilities. So at the EU level, steps are currently being undertaken already. So last year we saw the launch of the Social Economy Action Plan, and here a study on philanthropy has been announced. It's now in its last stages, and this could serve as a basis to then inform financial tools within a co-investment facility, potentially linked also to the InvestEU program at the EU level. And then last but not least, we also call on the national governments to provide for more flexible laws, so that foundations are also enabled to use the full toolbox of mission-related investments and impact investing in their national contexts. So that's just in a nutshell how we connect the enabling environment with our climate work. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Hanna. I think, the regulatory framework, it's indeed can hamper or incentivize, let's say, much more philanthropy's role in the economy overall, I would say. And this is a challenge that I suppose all of us face, climate or non-climate related overall. I would love to hear from Heather afterwards if you have any tips on how to engage with that, because I know you're an expert in this. But before asking for another round, I wanted to see if our audience here, if someone wants to make a remark, a question, a comment. Yeah.
I came in a bit late, so I missed a bit, but I'm very happy. Yeah, I'm Boris van Westering, Internews and the Earth Journalism Network. I'm based in Amsterdam, and I'm very happy to be here. And I just, a little observation that I had about mentioning about the priority setting of climate change. And the lack of understanding and knowledge what is there, and on the set of problems that people face, climate change is a luxury to think about. Yeah? And what we observe also from a media perspective is that the information ecosystem is not flowing right. So that means that academia, civil society, people from the ground, in connection with media and journalism, are not able to get the information flowing. So I strongly would also think about, the larger system of information flows that can help local civil society and also media actors to make sure that the connections between the actual solutions and what's happening out there, it affects all strata in their lives. And it is about conflict, it is about economy, it is about livelihood, it's about it. So if you open the digital paper, every little article, and I think everybody in the media that works, every little thing has to do with climate effects. So you cannot think it away. And it's also a bit our mission to work with media on making the dots and making the connections for journalists to translate these notions of climate change and mainstream it into media debate. So we don't want to set up green pages or put it in silos, but really let the information flow. And I'm really thankful for your remark and great to be here, actually.
Thank. Yeah. I'll just say 1 second, because this is a very important thing and a structural thing, which means the media doesn't really, except for the expert media, doesn't really know what philanthropy is as well. So it's a bigger issue as well, and let alone the climate. But I just wanted to see who wants to react to that or as other elements.
Yeah, I mean, I think Juan talked about this a bit and in terms of the intersectionality story. And I think that there's a real education that's needed around this. When we gathered a group of Global South impact leaders over the summer, and we brought up this topic, and there was actually a lot of anger in the room about, well, this is not something, this is not our top priority. We have all these other things we need to deal with. And how are we going to get people to understand, that this is what we're now putting money towards? But I think once you started getting down into the issues that they were really caring about, and the livelihoods, and just transition, and health and education, and all of these elements, and that is all interconnected with climate, then you started to get places. And I think we need better storytelling and explanations from the media that help to illustrate how these things are connected. But we also need, again, not to be a broken record, but we need tangible opportunities that we can present, and that's part of what our networks are doing, and bringing members together that are pooling capital or sharing opportunities so that they can collaborate on these solutions, because it's this interconnectedness that none of these things can be solved in a vacuum. And I think that's what we need to remember. I heard a statistic yesterday at the African Union's Pavilion that climate change is locked in for the next 20 years for Africa. No matter what we do right now, they have major changes coming over the next 20 years. And that was a shocking figure to me. And I keep wavering between this, this whole COP, it's, depression and then hope. And so I think, one other thing that we haven't talked as much about, but that's connected to this intersectionality piece, is the adaptation story. And that it's not something we hear a lot about, the mitigation, and that, we need these bankable deals. There's finance that's ready to go for that. The adaptation is not nearly as appealing. And maybe you could speak to this from a financial perspective. How do we start to get some of that story out there for funders, but in particular Africa, where we've all heard the stat of the only 3% or less than 4% of the emissions are coming out of Africa, but huge amounts of impact here. So how can we be mobilizing philanthropy for the adaptation story as well?
Yeah, thank you for this question. Indeed, I think you also touched on storytelling, and that's so key also to draw in additional funding, additional philanthropists, but also really make the case that climate is an intersectional issue and it is affecting all of us. So for that reason, together with our coalition, with our movement, we have launched just this week actually a campaign, a communications campaign, where we have used the power of storytelling to put a few foundations forward, which tell their story in a very personal way, where CEOs step up and share why they think, even though their foundation is working, for example, culture, why is climate so important? And we hope that with this campaign we can also mobilize more philanthropists to act in this space and to join our movement, really.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate one thing about the storytelling, which is very key to one of the biggest challenges that we have in the Arab region around data, right? So we don't have any data, which is, that's just the problem right there. And one of the things that we've been working on really very diligently over the last 8 years is not only the creation of data, but the creation of actually locally owned data, and making that connection between owning your own data, having the capacity and the power, and being empowered to analyze your own data, is really one of the ways that you get to own the narrative, which you can then use to tell the story, right? And so it's connected in that way. And we've really been trying to make that case by also insisting that when we are asked to partner on projects that require data, that we're not willing to partner with anyone who won't allow us to own the data ourselves, even if we can't pay for it. So that's been one of our, what's the word I'm looking for? One of the conditions. Did somebody say conditions? Conditions. One of the conditions, which hasn't always been, it hasn't always been accepted very openly. But I don't really care. I'm insisting. It's one of those things. It's what we need. It's what we need.
Do you want to comment?
Well, I just basically wanted to comment that based on our understanding on how to convey a climate action message, especially of course in Latin America, we found out that it's super important to balance out, of course, the challenge and not to sound like super catastrophic with the opportunity and how can things improve. So in that way, you're creating like this narrative of, okay, this is important, but also that the narrative that you can act now. So that's what we're trying to convey in Latin America. So this balance between emergency and opportunity.
Heather, you want to
Oh yeah, sorry.
Certainly, well, I'm echoing all points. The data point, incredible. And I think that it's quite extraordinary because right now in this process, we're kind of having to build the plane as we fly it, as it were, which is not necessarily a comfortable place for whether you're a foundation or you're a financial institution or anything else, when you like certainty and to be able to project future values and returns and objectives. And we just don't have we're kind of working on shifting sands to a certain extent. One thing I think is quite interesting to the point you made around the policy space, we've talked a lot about projects where you need some first movers and governments in there to kind of take that initial slice of risk. And to a certain extent, what we've been trying to do, certainly within our group, is to kind of look at it from a different way and say, well, how do we de-risk the really big policy decisions for politicians? Because they have their own different risk profiles and risk agendas, and certainly I don't think I'm speaking out of turn to say that potentially it's been a wee bit chaotic in the UK recently, in that just a little bit. But ultimately, when you're kind of going through that turbulence, how do we get industry and philanthropy and civil society kind of talking about the same things, where you're kind of saying, listen, if you go further with this and give us a bit more, we can deliver on that and make it much more of instead of a reaction to policy, almost a pact that you can go into. And I think that level of collaboration allows for slightly kind of bolder policy opportunities within there, bearing in mind that we are all very cognizant of the unknowns, the known unknowns within there, and that those represent a real tangible risk that mean that institutions, whether they be philanthropic or financial or anything else, don't really necessarily have their fit the risk appetite.
We have one more intervention here.
Well, not sure. My name is Amália Souza from Casa Social Environmental Fund. We're based in Brazil. We've been making grants for 17 years to grassroots communities all across the region. And we had to learn fast a little bit. What I haven't learned is like you studying the language of impact investing, because we are dealing with the most affected communities in the biggest forest of the planet, and who want to have a better life, who want to engage economically and support themselves. But usually the resources don't reach them because they are considered inept. They can't deal, which is not true. So it's a very interesting connection. I think that there are layers that we can work with, and we've been finding our niche within this conversation that we've began to follow, because there's a role, and that's the philanthropy part that is not investment in terms of return, but it's investment in terms of enabling these communities to begin to engage. And we've learned along the years that how fast that return is. When somebody actually trusts that they're capable, gives them the tools, offers them the tools to build the capacity, the management capacity, which can start at the level that they are, meet them where they are really quick at responding, and very fast they can attract investments. And the other thing that we've been finding, and I think that has everything to do with this conversation, is that there are searches and searches for landing reasonable levels of capital into bioeconomy, into proving that the forest standing is more valuable. And it's true, and it's possible, but it's possible in the sense that we outscale that resource. And that's actually, that is an art. That's an art we've been developing, and it's one that we would love to share more and work better together to connect the first investment for building the capacity with the impact investing in the sequence, because it's possible to do. And we need to actually work this out together so that we actually can make these resources arrive. Otherwise, they're not going to reach them.
Thank you very much. I think, well, we need to embrace the complexity, right? I think we need to have better data. We need to use our networks better and more effectively and more innovatively, maybe, if that exists, I don't know. We need to have better storytelling. We need to have enabling environments and policy framework. So to conclude to the last round, so what would you like to see as the network of philanthropies and philanthropies overall delivering, let's say, in 5 years' time? Where would you like to see yourself, your own network in the climate, contributing, let's say, to in one side, tackle the climate emergence, and on the other side, also to use the opportunities that the agenda brings? Let's just do it maybe like this.
Okay, so I'll start. Okay. That's an interesting question. So in 5 years' time, so two main things. At least from a Latin American focus, of course, philanthropy remains a niche, and we need to build an ecosystem. So that means opening the space for more organizations to work in. So it's how we convert climate philanthropy from a niche to an actual ecosystem. That's something I would love to see in 5 years' time. And I think we're on the right path, especially with the support of Wings, with the climate philanthropy commitment, and with more and more governments and private sector talking about climate action, and more decisively, and more genuinely, which is something as well that is super important. And the second thing is that I think as well, through these structures, we're going to stop having like parallel groups or parallel lines or structures as well that currently happen in the global south, where one group goes international funders, and in the other one goes local funders. That is something that happens a lot, but it's starting to change. But for example, organizations working in the climate space in Colombia, for example, they just go into the the NGOs directly, and they don't stop to talk as well with what we call the local philanthropic space. And I think that needs to happen more, because international actors have a lot to teach and to learn from local philanthropic actors, and as well they can actually push local philanthropic actors to act more decisively on issues around climate issues, around environmental protection, and supporting environmental defenders. So there's an innovative finance around conservation. So I think those are the two main things I would like to see. So going from a niche to an ecosystem, and stop having two parallel sectors of philanthropy and build just one.
So in 5 years, I'd love the planet to still be around. That would be fun. But from the perspective of my network, I mean, I think one thing is, of course, I'd love to see a lot more engagement. And I take responsibility partially for making that happen as well, right? To say that a part of it is also the convening, and we have that convening power. And so it's kind of the onus is on us really to bring people together under the education sort of sphere of what to understand about this conversation and how they can contribute to it. And then just coming from this region, 400 million people, 22 countries, and 50% of whom are under the age of 25, we have a youth population that is the demographic that is about to inherit this crisis. So they need to be better equipped to target it and mitigate it and create interventions and be brought into the conversation at a point where, by the time they're in positions to make impact, they actually have the tools that they need to make that impact.
In 5 years, right? So I think for us, the primary goal that we're focusing now with Philanthropy for Climate Movement, and Alice will notice, is that every foundation considers themselves to be a climate foundation. So what this means at the infrastructure, the network level, is that I would like to see more national associations also spearheading this work and also driving it, and no matter form that suits them, their national context best, to just join the movement. And so that's more on the climate side, but also on the enabling environment side. I was thinking in 5 years we will be 1 year down of the implementation of the Social Economy Action Plan launched by the European Union. So as you know, philanthropy is not only part of the civil society wider family, but also the social economy family. And I think if all the things that have been promised in the Social Economy Action Plan are implemented by then we will have all the measures in place that we need to enable more mission-related investments, have more impact investing, so that foundations can engage in what was mentioned before also by Fondo Caso representative, that there is this really the potential of foundations to engage in systemic change by using different tools at different moments to develop a certain project. So that's my wishful thinking for you today.
Oh, thank you. So I guess just very briefly within kind of the realm that I work in, I think that seeing the sector really use its convening power to bring in some of the actors that maybe are sitting on the fringes of things, but kind of using that power that does exist to get more people involved and to kind of help get the snowball a bit bigger as it goes along.
Well, I have the unenviable task of going last, so I agree with everything everyone has said. Excuse me. And I think what I would add from my perspective, being this family of networks, for me, it all comes back down to connections. And I think that I'm going to quote actually one of the Latimpacto board members. She has an amazing quote that's like, "We see constellations where others just see stars." And I think that is such a beautiful visualization of what we try to do as networks, and that we try to connect the dots across the continuum of capital, because we need all forms of capital to be playing a role in this, and they have very specific roles that they can play, but they can be working better together. So how do we smooth out those silos across this continuum? I would like to see that happen within the next 5 years. And then I think echoing what Naila said, but from a broader Global South perspective, making sure that the Global South has a seat at the table and has agency to be making the decisions for their own communities that work for at the local and regional level. Those are the two main things for me. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And if you are asking yourself why I ask 5 years, it's also because I think to understand the others, we need to put ourselves in the other's shoes. So if we are in a COP, always talking about raising ambition, making plans 5 years ahead and revising our own plans. So I hope we have the chance, let's say less than 5 years from now, to recap all these wishes and see where we are, because we need to have this vision there, and then we have a plan to get there. So with that, I wanted to close us today and thank you very much, the Bankers for Net Zero, for hosting us. Thanks everybody who joined online, everybody who's here, and all the speakers. And yeah, I wish you a pleasant day and rest of the COP. Thank you.